So good morning. Can someone hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Good morning, sir.
Okay, good morning. Fine. Fine. I'll just wait. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning to all. Respected our guest speaker, Mohan Kumar, sir, all our friends and well-wisher. Today, I, Nikita Singh, along with my co-host Mahak Mittal, on behalf of Kartavya, the Civil Services Society of Kirori College, is welcome you all to our annual festival, JUNOON 21. It is rightly said that all our dreams come true if we have the courage to pursue them. And similarly, the dream of Kartavya came true in the year 2017. Kartavya provides a collaborative learning ambience to all our learners, and Junoon is the reflection of hard work and enthusiasm of all the members of Kartavya. To glorify today's event, we have our guest speaker with us, Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, and to give a short introduction speech about him, my co-host Mehak Mittal is going to give.
Thank you so much, Nikita. Ambassador Professor Mohan Kumar is a career diplomat who is Delhi University alumni and holds his doctorate in political science and government from Sciences Po University, Paris. He has served the Indian government as an ambassador to France and Monaco and Kingdom of Bahrain and has an expertise in the area of international trade. He was the first lead negotiator at General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, and then he was at World Trade Organization. He is a chairman at Research and Information System, a think tank based in New Delhi, and is also a professor and dean at Office of International Affairs and Global Initiatives, Jindal Global University. I welcome you, sir, on behalf of Kartavya.
Um, Nikita, you need to unmute yourself. I can't hear you.
I'm so sorry. With India serving its eighth term with United Nations Security Council and a single candidate of Asia Pacific Group, it aims for a reformed multilateral system. International peace and security comes with an excess of challenges, and it has even now complex with economically and as well as politically with the advent of COVID-19 pandemic.
It is the problems, the solutions, and India's role and opportunity to build a strong national image in this multilateral world order that will be focused and discussed upon by our speaker for the day, Ambassador Professor Mohan Kumar. Anyone who has or will have any questions pertaining to the topic, kindly jot them down in the chat box. We are going to take the questions at the end of the session. The session is all yours, sir.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank the Kirori College Civil Services Society for this opportunity. And as I understood from one of your colleagues, I'm expected to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we will take questions if there are any. So let me jump straight into the topic. I think we are talking about reformed multilateral trading system, the multilateral UN system, and so on. So let me begin by underlining what are the goals of India's multilateral diplomacy. Because unless you understand what the goals and objectives of India's multilateral diplomacy are, you are not likely to understand India's proposals for reform. So, in order to understand the multilateral system or the diplomatic framework, let's look at what India's objectives are. I would begin by saying that I think the most important objective for India really at this point is to get about 400 million people out of poverty. That to me is the single most important goal of India's multilateral diplomacy. So you will observe I'm not mentioning Kashmir, I'm not mentioning internal cohesion. I'm not mentioning democracy. I'm not mentioning pluralism. All these are important. But if India is to go from being a swing power to a leading power, the broad objective of India's diplomacy is to go from a swing or balancing power to a leading power. And you can't do that with 400 million people living in poverty. It's simply impossible. China has just announced that they have managed to eradicate extreme poverty. That's what we are looking at. And even if you doubt the Chinese government, if you travel to China, you can make out they don't have the kind of stark poverty that we have. Now, this presents an interesting situation because, according to my assessment, there are only two regions of the world which now have millions and millions of people living in poverty. One is South Asia, and obviously India matters because we are just so big and we have so many people in India alone living in poverty that India really is the one country that is important in South Asia. The other region, which has millions and millions of people living in poverty, is Sub-Saharan Africa. So these are the only two regions, whichever way you look at it. Just remember that yesterday, Bangladesh has graduated from being a least developed country to a developing country. On some indicators, Bangladesh is doing better than India in terms of child mortality, in terms of gender parity, and so on. So this is something that you need to understand. So I would say that is really the most important objective. Now I will talk of two fora where I think India wants reforms in the multilateral framework. One is obviously the United Nations, and the United Nations is often considered the Mecca of multilateral diplomacy because it just has so much of universal membership there. It has 198, 99 countries now who are members of the UN. So the United Nations is really the pinnacle of multilateral diplomacy. In the United Nations, if you look at the Security Council, you've got membership of the Security Council, which is rooted in the post-World War II framework. So it's like asking one of you folks to have a 2G phone when we are on the verge of going to be 5G. So it's like giving you all phones which have only 2G and asking you to operate your Facebook, your Instagram, and your Amazon, and your Google, and the rest of it. And that is simply absurd. So the reform of the UN Security Council, to me, seems like the first important reform objective of the government of India. Now, one of the important problems we have faced in the United Nations is that there are some countries which are opposed to India getting there. We will begin with Pakistan, which obviously has no interest in seeing India in the UN Security Council. But there are also other countries which are joining hands with Pakistan. Italy does not want to see Germany, for example, in the Security Council. Argentina doesn't want to see Brazil in the Security Council. So we have a political landscape in the United Nations where the text-based negotiations, I mean, if you're going to negotiate in the United Nations, you need a text. You need a negotiating text, a piece of paper on which you can negotiate. That is simply not taking off. So what are the options for India? So option number one, we just continue like this. And this seems such a shame because the UN Security Council is simply not representative of contemporary reality. So you have an obsolete, anarchic framework of the UN Security Council claiming to represent the world, which it doesn't. So that's the first. The second thing that we can do, and to me, it seems that is what we should be doing. India has already joined hands with Germany, Brazil, and Japan. This is called the G4. These are the 4 countries which aspire to be um, in the Security Council, and they have joined hands to form a group called G4. And this has been pushing hard for a reform of the Security Council, especially these 4 countries want to be part of the permanent members of the Security Council with a power of veto. The important question to ask is what happens to Africa? One of the most iniquitous, unfair things about the present Security Council is that Africa has no place at all. At least Asia, China can claim that we represent Asia, although that wouldn't be factually correct. But at least China can make that claim. Whereas Africa is simply not represented at all in the UN Security Council. So my view is that the G4 countries somehow have to get Africa on board. Now, everyone who's followed this dossier or issue knows that in Africa, there is no consensus. There is a competition between South Africa and Nigeria. Both countries feel they deserve to be in the Security Council. There are differences over the question of veto and so on. So what I would recommend is a very tight, strong conversation between G4 and Africa, because my feeling is if G4 and Africa can come to a broad agreement on the outline of a reform of the Security Council, and then put it to a vote in the UN General Assembly, get a 2/3 support. You can't get unanimous support because Pakistan will never agree, Argentina will never agree, Italy will never agree. That's fine. But can you get 2/3 support in the UN General Assembly? If the G4 and Africa can get 2/3 support, it seems to me you have a broad progress in the matter. You can make a case for yourself and for others. If you don't do that, I think we are fighting an uphill battle because it's going to take a long time. And as time passes, it just becomes more and more ridiculous that you have a UN Security Council, which, as I said earlier, does not represent at all the contemporary reality. You have a further problem in the UN Security Council today, which is that there is no agreement between China and the United States on virtually any issue in the world. So that is something that is a huge problem. Then you've got Russia, which also does not agree with the United States on many issues. So on most issues, you have a division in the Security Council with United States, UK, and France on the one hand, and China and Russia on the other. So such a divided UN Security Council, such a UN Security Council which is not reflective of contemporary reality, and a UN Security Council which was not able to present a timely and unified response to Corona or the COVID. I think that has been a dismal state of affairs, frankly. So this is really what we are looking at. And I believe that India may have to change a little bit its strategy to achieve its objectives. So far, we've been saying a text-based negotiation, but that doesn't seem to be happening. And I think if in the next 1 year that doesn't happen, India will have to embark on a different strategy of the G4 plus Africa, putting an issue to vote in the General Assembly and getting 2/3 majority. So that seems to me the approach which for me is logical and has a better chance of success than the one we've been following up until now. The second organization which I want to focus on for reforms is the WTO, the World Trade Organization. I happen to have spent at least 10 years in Geneva as a negotiator with first the GATT and then the WTO. The WTO is really at a crossroads. The United States under Donald Trump made sure that the dispute resolution mechanism of the WTO collapsed. They also made sure that they vetoed the appointment of the new Nigerian lady as Director General of WTO. So what the American administration has done, the Joe Biden administration, they have first unblocked the veto on the Director General of WTO. So the WTO now has a new Director General, which it did not have for the last 6 months. So you have the Nigerian who's actually taking office today in Geneva as Director General of the WTO. That's a good development. It's a positive development. On the other hand, the United States must engage with the WTO to restore the appellate body. You know, the WTO dispute settlement mechanism, I don't know how many of your students and your colleagues know this, but the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO is very unique. And that is what makes the WTO a very special organization. It is a binding dispute settlement. It's not like the United Nations where you talk of a Palestine state for 20 years and nothing happens. The WTO dispute settlement mechanism is extremely rigorous and enforceable. So if the WTO dispute settlement mechanism says India is wrong, then you will be responsible for monetary compensation to countries which have won against you. So the WTO, in that sense, is representative of what I call hard law. In international law, you've got hard law and soft law. The WTO is hard law. The UN is soft law. So this is a distinction which is worth making. As far as WTO is concerned, India, apart from the restoration of the dispute settlement mechanism, which is urgent, I also believe India has to somehow find a way out of the special and differential treatment that India gets in the WTO. Let me spend a couple of minutes explaining what I mean by special and differential treatment. The WTO gives certain advantages to developing countries and least developed countries. So, for example, if there is a new law on intellectual property rights, which the WTO has decided, if it gives 5 years to Canada, United States, and Europe to implement the law by making changes to domestic legislation, India will get 10 years. Canada, United States, and Europe might get 5 years to bring themselves into conformity with WTO law. India and other African countries might get 10 years. This is known as special and differential treatment in the WTO. The Donald Trump administration questioned the giving of special and differential treatment to India. Their way of looking at it was that China and India don't deserve special and differential treatment because we are big countries, because India is part of the G20 grouping, because India is a 2.7 trillion economy, and because India sends IT engineers to San Francisco and Infosys is a big company and so on. So we have been trying to tell and convince our American friends that India is a very, very unique and complex country. In fact, I would make this point to you and your colleagues. We are probably the only country in the world today which have got features of developed, developing, and least developed countries, all rolled into one. So if you go to a gated community in Gurgaon or Noida, I've lived 35 years of my life abroad, and I can tell you that in some of these gated communities, it's like living in Paris, except for the pollution and the weather, of course. Except for the pollution and the weather, you're actually living in a developed country. If you're living in one of those ultra expensive gated communities, if you're living in Chandni Chowk in Delhi, you're pretty much living in a developing country, right? If you happen to live in a flat there, it's like living in any developing country in Africa. If you live really in parts of Chhattisgarh, Jumri Talaya, and I don't want to say that Jumri Talaya is a bad place. I'm sure it's a fascinating place. I've never been there. But What I'm saying is you do have parts of the country which actually are like least developed countries in Africa. I have lived 3 years in Congo, Kinshasa, which is one of the toughest places in Africa. A lot of poverty, a lot of difficulties. But let me be honest, and don't get me wrong, I'm a very proud Indian and I'm fond of India. I love India and the rest of it, Mera Bharat Mahan and all that. But the fact is, I have never seen poverty in Congo the way I have seen in India, parts of India. You know, when you see some laborers eating two rotis with salt and with a green chili, and this happens even today. If you go to some of the building sites in Delhi, you will find the laborers who are working there, who are daily laborers, obviously, who are paid 400, 500 rupees a day. This is what they eat for lunch. Now, this, you can't justify this by saying that these people only live in poverty. In my view, they live in extreme poverty because they don't have a roof over their house. Even if they do, it's a slum. They don't have full access to sanitation. They don't have access to clean energy fuel, cooking fuel. So this is the complex situation in India. And we tried telling the Trump administration that, listen, it's not fair to call India not a developing country. We are very much a developing country. I would like to make a point on how India is not the same as China. Much as all of us would love to compare India and China, this would be a mistake. All your colleagues must realize that China has left India far behind in economic terms. There is no comparison. I'm sure some of you are students of economics. You take the GDP, take the per capita GDP, take the millions of people living in poverty in both countries. China virtually has none. You've got 400 million, as I just said. You take a look at defense expenditure. You take a look at health. You take a look at social safety network, which China has managed to provide for its people. In India, if you are dirt poor and you fall sick, you really run the risk of dying because you can't go to a hospital. And the first thing the hospital will ask you is, show me your credit card or your debit card. Otherwise, I'm not going to treat you. This is not the case in China. So anyway, to cut a long story short, China has gone way beyond India. So the challenge in the WTO in terms of reforms of the multilateral trading system, I want to make the following 3 points. One, India needs the multilateral trading body WTO. We need it more than other countries. That's point number one. Point number two, we have to restore the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO. Third, we need special and differential treatment. China may not need it, but we do. So this is a conversation that we should be having with our American friends in the WTO, because we need the support of the United States and Europe in order to achieve a reform of the multilateral trading system embodied by WTO, which will enable us to achieve the most important objective of multilateral diplomacy, which, as I said in the beginning of my lecture, is only one. As far as I'm concerned, India needs to focus only on one objective. The rest of it is important, but not crucial. The most important is, can you lift 400 million people out of poverty? This is the only thing which is going to make India a leading power, both in the region and outside. Let me address the next 8 minutes of my speech or thereabouts to talk about the rise of plurilateral framework or organizations. The first plurilateral organization I would like to talk about is G20. The G20 has emerged as a very, very important plurilateral organization which deals with global economic governance. And this is extremely important because the United Nations economic systems had failed to produce results. They had failed to deliver. So the G20 was established in the aftermath of the global economic crisis, 2008. And since then, the G20 has been playing a useful role in enabling the most important countries to coordinate their economic policies, macroeconomic policies. The G20 virtually covers 70 to 80% of global GDP. India is a member, China is a member, the United States is a member, Europe is a member. So G20 really is a very, very representative body for economic management. But since then, they have also charted out new actions in climate change, against terrorism, the Financial Action Task Force on Terrorism, and in areas like data security. You know, the new name of the game in the fourth industrial revolution is actually data. Data is the new oil. You must have heard the saying. Data is the new oil, like steam and coal and oil before. So data security, data flow is now an important subject dealt with by G20. India plays an active part in G20, but I think India needs to up its game in G20 as well. As you know, India is going to host the G20 summit in 2023, and we should be actually preparing from now onwards for that summit. I want to talk about the rise of certain plurilateral fora because the UN Security Council is divided. And one of them, which is extremely important for India, is the Quadrilateral Security Alliance in the Indo-Pacific, what is known as the Quad. And this Quad comprises United States, India, Japan, and Australia. And these countries are extremely interested in keeping the sea lanes of communication open. And it'll interest you to know that 80% of world trade goes through sea lanes. So sea lanes have become extremely important. In fact, the future of influence in the world is in the maritime sphere. It's not on land. The days of armies invading countries and taking over countries is gone. Now it is the maritime sphere which is going to play an extremely critical role in which countries will dominate. There is an old saying in Indian foreign policy, whoever controls Indian Ocean controls the region. So the Indian Ocean becomes extremely important. The South China Sea becomes extremely important. I would request those of you who are interested in international relations to look at a map. If you don't know how to look at a map, you will miss the wood for the trees in international. You must look at the map. Look at all the choke points in the map, starting with Suez Canal, actually starting with Panama Canal. You've got the Panama Canal, you've got the Suez Canal, you've got Bab el-Mandeb, you've got the Strait of Hormuz, you've got the Malacca Straits. That is how you should envision the world. It's only then you will understand. Why do you think United States has 800 to 1,000 military bases in the world? Why is United States still the most preeminent maritime power in the world? Because it's got 800,000 bases. China is trying to catch up, but is way behind. And this is why India's partnership with the United States in the maritime sphere, along with Japan and along with Australia, which are also maritime powers, makes a lot of sense. So the Quadrilateral Security Alliance is one which ironically threatens the UN Security Council. Because the UN Security Council is not doing its job properly, you've got the rise of plurilateral fora like the Quad. But India is doing a very tough balancing act. India is the only country which participates in the Quad. It also participates in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which has got China, which has got Russia, India, etc. We also participate in Japan, America, India, J. We also participate in Russia, India, China. So India is the only bridging power. We are the only power which is constant in all these plurilateral fora. You will never find another country which is part of everything. It's only India. Because if you take China, China is not part of Quad. But India is part of Quad. India is also part of other things that China does, like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, like the new infrastructure bank that China has set up. The only thing we are not part of is the Belt and Road Initiative of China. And let me spend a couple of minutes explaining why this is an important strategic threat for India. The Belt and Road Initiative, launched by China, goes through disputed areas of India-Pakistan border, which is why we don't want to be part of the Belt Road Initiative. We also have serious concerns about the transparency and viability of Chinese loans and money given by China to these countries which are participating in the Belt Road Initiative. So that is why we have countered this and we have not joined the Belt and Road Initiative. A final word on vaccine diplomacy by India, what is called vaccine Maitri. I think India is known legitimately as the pharmacy of the world because we are the largest producer of generic drugs in the world. What we are doing is we are promoting vaccine diplomacy to reinforce multilateral and plurilateral institutions. I don't know if you know that India has supplied the vaccines to all the UN peacekeepers, the United Nations peacekeepers. And this is interesting. Nobody else has done that. So we are going out of our way to supply vaccines to countries that need it. And I think we are acquiring so much goodwill because of what we are doing. So let me stick to my 30-minute limit. It's 11:30. I'm happy to stop here and ask and answer questions that your colleagues might have. So once again, thank you for this wonderful opportunity of interacting with young people. And I'd like to thank Kirori Civil Services Society for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The session was really very insightful. And the way you have put lights upon how the only objective which India needs to follow, the organization and everything was really very great. And I hope and everyone acquired a great knowledge about that. And now moving ahead, we are open for our question answer session. Anyone having any queries can drop down in the chat box and we will be telling your name and you will be asking the questions one by one.
Okay, so before moving forward with the questions that we've got in the chat box, so there is a question from one of our executive members. He says that as India joins the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent member in 2021, and also this year India will chair the executive board of the World Health Assembly. So how India is going to set a new global response in terms of multilateralism when we consider both of these situations?
So that's a good question, and thank you for that question. On the United Nations Security Council, it's important to bear in mind that we will be a non-permanent member without any veto rights. So that is the general terms of engagement under which India has joined the Security Council. So by definition, if you don't have veto rights and you are a non-permanent member, it's very hard to set an agenda in the Security Council. So I would be lying to you if I said that, oh, India is becoming a non-permanent member of the Security Council and we are going to dominate the agenda of the UN Security Council. That would be wrong. It's not possible for India to do it because if India says something, all China has to do is just put up its flag and the Chinese ambassador says, I don't agree and I veto it. That's the end of the matter. which is why it's important to change the rules and terms of engagement in the UN Security. But what India can do as a non-permanent member is try and focus attention on issues that have not been focused on by the UN Security Council so far. So it could be the North-South divide, it could be vaccine diplomacy, it could be the concerns of least developed countries in Africa, it could be terrorism, where India can take a lead role and try to build a consensus. So I would say it's hard work. India will have to do they will really have to go to great lengths to kind of persuade other members. It is an exercise in persuasion that India will have to do, because India doesn't have the clout as a non-permanent member. That is what, as far as WHO is concerned, the person who asked the question is absolutely right. We are going to be on the executive committee of the WHO, World Health Assembly. But again, we are playing a very important role. The WHO funded vaccine is also contributed by Serum Institute of India in Pune. It is Serum Institute which is delivering the vaccines to United Nations, WHO, what is known as a co-vaccine effort, and India is contributing significantly. What India wants from the WHO is a better system in the future. Look, all of you need to know that this is not the last pandemic. We're going to have more pandemics in the future. If we do, we want a better warning system from the WHO. You can't have a system where the disease has spread so much and then the WHO comes into action and says, no, you must do this, you must do. We must have early warning systems. The moment 2-3 people get this kind of a pandemic, we should be able to shut down the problem. I mean, I'm not pointing any blame to China, but the fact of the matter is there have been some major mistakes made in the beginning when the COVID situation got out of hand. For example, travel should have been banned immediately. It was not banned. People were merrily going from one country to another. Second, as soon as a particular place gets it, it has to be informed to WHO so that WHO can send a team immediately. The WHO team has been able to go to China only now, after 1 year. It's too late. So we should have a better early warning system. This will be the objective of India in the World Health Assembly. But thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer, sir. And another question that I have is that you talked about bilateralism and plurilateralism as well as and we have the session on multilateralism, right? So if we talk about the poverty in India, like you also said that the major objective should be to uplift the poor people. So, sir, according to you, what do you think that with this pandemic going on, that what is going to be more beneficial to India? Is it going to follow the multilateral path or the plurilateral path?
So for now, we will do both because we are not in a position to choose one or the other. But what we are doing is we are trying to convey the message to United Nations that if you don't reform the Security Council and give India a seat at the high table, we are going to pursue plurilateral efforts. The UN should be acutely aware that G20 is actually started doing some of the things that the UN Security Council should be doing. Unfortunately, the UN Security Council hasn't risen to the occasion. So you've got G20 doing at least some of the things that the UN should be doing. Similarly, the most important security alliance in Indo-Pacific is the Quad. So you are going to have more and more such plurilateral frameworks, which will question inaction by UN Security Council. So, for example, there is talk of resilient supply chains. And what is meant by resilient supply chains is that countries which can trust each other are going to trade among themselves. Now, this the WTO must be aware of. So I would say that while the election of Joe Biden is a positive development for multilateralism, I would also say that there has been a certain loss of faith in multilateralism, even by countries like India. And this loss of faith must be addressed by the multilateral fora. And if that is not addressed, I see a trend of India, while they will participate in the UN, we are not going to leave the UN, but we will focus more and more our efforts on plurilateral mechanisms and on bilateral things that we do with the United States and Europe. So that's what is going to happen. Thank you.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. One of our audience members, he has raised a question. Trilok Singh. Trilok Singh, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Go
Sir,
ahead.
as we all know, COVID-19 has pushed us back in our fight against extreme poverty. So, apart from our domestic policies and initiatives, what greater role can multilateral institutions play in supporting India's fight against poverty?
That's a good question, Trilok, and I'd like to thank you for it. So, one of the things that we have to do is get multilateral funding for our efforts against poverty. And we should do much more. Believe me, there is enough money from Melinda Gates and Bill Gates Foundation. There is enough money from Europe, enough money from Japan, provided you can conceive programs which are properly conceived and carefully executed. So you must get multilateral funding. That's the first. And for this, you need to go to World Bank, you need to go to IMF, you go to Asian Development Bank, and so on. But you also go to private foundations like Bill Gates, Melinda Gates Foundation. That's one. The second thing that we need to do to lift these people from poverty, and you're right, you are absolutely right in saying the COVID situation has set us back by at least 2 or 3 years in our fight against poverty. The second thing that we must get is foreign direct investment. So this, the government has been going out of its way. You'll be happy to know that Apple has set up a factory in India. Samsung has set up a factory in Noida. So these are things which the government is trying very hard, because by getting foreign direct investment into India, you create jobs. And that is the need of the hour. As you know, COVID has created an unemployment problem or an underemployment problem. If not unemployment, at least underemployment. People are taking lesser money and staying on in the private sector. This is a major problem. And so foreign direct investment will solve that problem. So one is multilateral funding. The second is foreign direct investment. But the third and the most important part of my answer to your question is the use of technology. This is absolutely critical. How can you use technology? For example, the COVID situation has demonstrated that there is a serious lack of internet infrastructure in the country. I mean, I teach online at Jindal Global University, but even in a place like Jindal Global University, where students are rich, they can afford the fees, not rich, but at least upper middle class, even they are having connectivity problems in their homes. I can't teach for 3 hours without somebody experiencing a connectivity problem. This is completely unacceptable, because if you're sitting at home, you have no college, without internet connectivity, you can't learn anything. So if this is the situation with regard to middle class people, can you imagine the plight of the poor people who are getting their courses on WhatsApp? The other day, my domestic was telling me that the domestic help in our house, her daughter apparently, or her son apparently, gets the class work on his WhatsApp in his mobile, because it's a government school, right? They don't have fancy laptops like you guys, Apple and Mac Air and Professional and so on. They just make do with whatever mobile phone they have. First of all, reading the damn thing on the mobile itself will strain your eyes, because you're spending 3-4 hours. So we have a serious deficit in terms of internet infrastructure. This has to be rectified. But if you get these three things right, and for again, this we'll have to go to the multilateral funding. The Sustainable Development Goal number 1. I hope you are all familiar with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. If you're not familiar, you should take a look at it. The Sustainable Development Goal number 1, which is to get rid of extreme poverty, is not possible without India and Africa. As I keep telling you, we are the only regions of the world. Let us be a little humble as Indians. Let's not say that we have arrived. We are the best country in the world. Don't do that. It'll make you seem very stupid when you say that outside your country. Country ke andar theek hai. Everybody will believe you. But you go outside the country and say it, they'll think you're an idiot, that you are saying India is the land of milk and honey. We are not. So the best thing is to accept that there are some serious deficiencies and try and attract capital, try and get multilateral funding. And trust me, there are enough people who are willing to fund, provided they know the funds will be used properly in India. Thank you. I can spend another 5 minutes. So whatever questions are there, please ask.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for your answer, sir. Next question we have is from Dipali. Dipali, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
So my question is that, sir, is India facing a crisis of health multilateralism while maintaining a balance in vaccine diplomacy? Isn't it a threat to domestic needs for vaccines?
No, that's an interesting question. No, I don't think so. I think my conversation with the health secretary the other day leads me to believe that we have planned it quite well. You see, what you have to understand is the 100% of the country need not be vaccinated. It's not necessary. What is necessary is to achieve what is known as herd immunity. And to achieve that, you need to target the most sensitive or vulnerable sections of the population. That includes chaps like me who are 63 years old. So I'll probably go and get a shot this week. But I'm saying, basically, you need the older people, the frontline workers, the police, the armed forces. I'm glad the Prime Minister himself has taken the vaccine shot today, and so on. So I don't think we are running short of vaccines. Our problem is something else. And this I would like to Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. So this happens even in my house. There was a power outage. So I'm using my router now. So anyway, you can hear me, right? Okay, good. So I was talking about the SDG number 1 in particular. So my view is that we should really do everything in our power to achieve the SDG 1. And SDG 1 cannot be achieved without India and Africa being on board. But I was going to say something else. I'm happy to spend another 5 minutes because of the break. So if your students are interested, I can spend another 5 minutes. See, we lost 350,000 people last year to tuberculosis. 350,000. India has the largest number of deaths because of TB. Yet there was no hullabaloo. This corona, we have lost 150,000. I'm not saying that death can be evaluated in terms of numbers, but every death is a death and it is regrettable. But actually the corona death is far lower than the TB death we have every year. but nobody bothered about the TB people who died last year. So why is it that we value one thing more than the other? We have gone to such lengths to fight corona, but every year we have people dying of TB, of cholera, of typhoid, which we don't care. So I would say the larger health crisis that you are talking about is that. And for that, I think what we need to do now is to create Ayushman Bharat is, I think, one step in the right direction, but we need to do much more. I talk to some poor people and I keep asking them, what is it that you want in your life? Let me tell all of you, they don't want your pizzas, they don't want your mobile phones, they don't want your fancy shoes and your glasses and your shirts. They are just asking two things for their children: health, education. This is all the poor people want. They say, Hamara to gaya. There is somebody who's miserable. At 40 years, he can't change his life in India. Very difficult. So he says, Hamara to chhodiye aap. But for our children, we want these two. If you guarantee these two, number one, he says, we will not have too many children. So that is an answer to the question as to why they have many children, because they still worry about children dying and so on. It may not matter to you and me, but to him it matters. So I would say the focus on health and education is what is going to change the face of India. Because if you can't get this right, and I'm somewhat concerned about the difference in quality of education from one college to another, from one university to another, from one city to another. Jhumri Talaya should be able to produce the same candidate as St. Stephen's, Delhi. You must have the same degree of quality. It can't be that one college has got one quality and you go to somewhere else and then you find that the quality drops. That's not acceptable. So we must find a way to do that. That's the challenge. Any other question?
So if time allows, then we can take, I think, one more question. Okay, so we have another question from Mr. Nikhil Kumar. Nikhil, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Good morning, sir. Sir, in the last year, we saw a massive disruption in the supply chain side, mainly due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we saw that many of the countries openly endorsing the view of self-reliance, including India. So, sir, I want to know, how do you see the future of globalization or international trade, or are we heading towards a new globalization?
I missed the last part of your question. Are we heading towards
new form of globalization, like new globalization?
Yeah, got it. Thank you. That's an excellent question, and we will finish with this question because it's a really good question. Look, it is true that there is no going back to globalization as it existed before the pandemic. So that's out. When I say that, what I mean is easy immigration to the West, easy, shall we say, a shrinking of the state, the role played by the market. All this is gone now because there is so much of inequality which resulted from the former aspect or the former, shall we say, model of globalization, that is not going to be repeated. So you will not. So what you are going to have is, if you like, globalization 2.0. If you like, I'm just using 2.0, but you know what I'm saying. What are the main characteristics of this new globalization? One, it is going to be more difficult for people of your generation to go wherever you want in the world. Immigration is not going to be easy. I know you're not happy hearing this, but I must tell you the truth. Okay. Second, there is going to be some emphasis on skills which are not readily available. So if you do something in artificial intelligence, if you do something in the tech area, it will be easy to emigrate. That's a fact. Third, I think the term Atmanirbhar Bharat, used by the Prime Minister and others, has been seriously misinterpreted. I would begin by saying, don't translate it as meaning self-reliance. Then you will have a problem. Because self-reliance will take us back to 70s and 80s in India when nothing was available. And I remember going to Geneva for the first time, and I was only bringing lipsticks and toothbrushes and toothpaste for my sisters. Yahi hoga. So that I think nobody wants. We now get everything in India, and you guys are used to all this, so it's fine. We can't go back. So what is the meaning of this Atmanirbharata? The meaning is this. Do you want to depend on face masks and personal protective equipment on one country in the world when you have the next pandemic? Tell me. So supposing there is China, which gives you all the masks, would you be happy to depend on them? So no. Similarly, all your pharmaceutical products, they contain what is known as active pharmaceutical ingredients, API. These APIs also come from China, 70% of them. Would you be happy? No, you can't. Similarly, solar cells for your solar power, most of it comes from China. So I am not pinpointing China as the villain or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I'm only saying countries want to diversify their risk element. So that is going to be the nature of the game. You are likely to trade with those countries with whom you have more confidence. So, which is why when people ask me why India did not become part of RCEP, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, I say India may have to now look west. We may have to look at Africa. We may have to look at UK. We may have to look at EU for free trade agreements. That makes more sense for India than looking this side. Japan, Australia, we already have a free trade agreement. ASEAN, we already have a free trade agreement. Korea, we already have a free trade agreement. So we should now be looking west. But this is going to be to mean that actually technology or internet may lead to what is known as splinter net. I don't know if you've heard this expression. It is not internet, but splinter net. Splinter net means that if you go to China, you have no Google, you have no Amazon, you have no Facebook, you have to deal with Alibaba, you have to deal with Tencent. If you go to the West, you have Google, Amazon, etc. So the internet itself has become divided into two zones. You have one zone in which only Chinese companies dominate, and that's a huge part of the global population because it's 1.4 billion. In China, for example, when I went a year ago, nobody was using cash. Everybody uses Alipay. In fact, when I took out a $10 note, he looked at me as though I have come from Mars. In one of the museums that I wanted to go, I took out a $10 note and he was looking at me and saying, "Where are you from?" Because everybody uses the mobile phone. Whereas you go to India even now and you say, "Sir, cash de dijiye." You go to Khan Market and ask them, "Oh, kehta hai ki GST avoid kare, cash de dijiye aap." So there is a mindset problem as well. You know, this is something that we need to appreciate. But you are absolutely right, and I really admire you for asking this question because you're going to have a globalization which is going to be modified. We are just seeing the beginning of it. And I think it will become obvious as time goes along that we will have a new kind of framework, which, for example, you can only now travel if you have a vaccine certificate. How many African countries can afford this, you tell me? So obviously you're going to prevent them from traveling. And that is very unfair on the face of it. But so there is going to be inequality even out of vaccine situation. Not everybody is going to have the same access to vaccines, which is going to create inequality as well. So you're quite right. I don't know the eventual shape of globalization, but globalization is undergoing transformation. Thank you very much for the question. And thank you very much, guys. I'll take your leave now.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
We thank and extend our gratitude to our guest of honor, Dr. Mohan Kumar. It was our privilege to have you. Thank you so much for your valuable time, and the session was really very insightful. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. It was fun speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I would also like to thank everyone present over here for their cooperation and their presence. Everyone is requested to leave the meeting now. Session is over. Thank you.